Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was chosen by Odin to wield Mjolnir in Midgard's darkest hour? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in Jaka's city was a toxic cocktail of ash, ozone, and despair. It was an atmosphere that choked hope from the lungs before oxygen could ever enter. Izuku Midoriya knew the taste intimately. It was the grit between his teeth, the film on his tongue, the acrid burn in the back of his throat. Every ragged breath was a reminder of his failure. His body was a symphony of agony. The bones in his arms were a mesh of hairline fractures, his legs were screaming ligaments, and the searing pain radiating from his back suggested something vital had been torn. One for all, the sacred torch passed to him by the world's greatest hero, was now a self-immolating pyre. He had pushed past 100%, breaking the limits, and in doing so, had broken himself. And it wasn't enough. It was nowhere near enough. From his vantage point, a precarious perch on a collapsed overpass, he watched the apocalypse unfold. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was an extinction event. Gigantomachia, a living mountain of rage and loyalty, was carving a trench through the city, swatting heroes aside like flies. Each footstep was an earthquake. Each roar a sonic bomb that shattered glass and rattled souls for miles. The remaining heroes were a dwindling, desperate force, throwing everything they had at the behemoth to slow its inexorable march toward Tamura Shigaraki. But the true epicenter of their doom was Shigaraki himself. He was no longer just a man, no longer the petulant leader of the League of Villains. He was a god of ruin, a vessel for all for one's malevolence, with a quirk that could unmake the world with a touch. He moved with a horrifying, disjointed grace, a puppet animated by strings of pure hatred. Waves of decay radiated from him, not just from his hands, but from the very ground he walked on. Buildings crumbled into dust, asphalt dissolved into nothingness, and the screams of those caught in the tide were silenced with terrifying finality. Endeavor, status. We're losing the east flank. A panicked voice crackled over Deku's shattered comm unit. I'm busy! The flame hero's roar was more pain than powerful. Deku's eyes, blurry with blood and exhaustion, found him. Endeavor was a falling sun, a desperate inferno against the encroaching darkness. His prominence burn, an attack that could once level city blocks, was being swallowed by Shigaraki's hyper-regeneration. For every inch of flesh Endeavor incinerated, a foot of corrupted, scarred tissue grew back, stronger and more resilient. The number one hero was burning himself out, his flames fueled by little more than sheer, stubborn will. A flash of ice, brilliant and stark against the smoky sky, erupted nearby. Shoto Todoroki, his face a mask of grim determination, was trying to create barriers, to give the evacuation teams precious seconds. He erected a colossal wall of ice, heaven-piercing ice wall, a monument to his power. It glittered for a moment, a beautiful, fleeting bastion of hope. Shigaraki didn't even look at it. He gestured, and a dozen rivet stabs, tendrils of black, crackling energy, shot from his back, shattering the glacier into a million useless shards. Shoto was thrown back, his left side steaming, his right frosted over, the duality of his power a testament to his exhaustion. And then there was Kaken. Bakugo was a comet of uncontrolled fury. He blitzed through the air with his explosions, trying to find an opening, any opening, in Shigaraki's defense. Die, was his constant, guttural war cry, but it was laced with a desperation Deku had never heard before. He was fast, powerful, a prodigy in every sense of the word. But he was a firecracker against a nuclear bomb. Shigaraki turned, his movements unnervingly calm, and caught Bakugo's gauntlet with a bare hand. The skin sizzled but didn't decay. Such a loud, annoying little hero, all for one's voice layered over Shigaraki's, a chilling, condescending baritone. All that noise, just to die. A forest of black tendrils erupted from Shigaraki's back, impaling Bakugo from multiple angles. The explosion stopped. The shouting stopped. For a heart-stopping moment, the only sound was the sickening squelch of flesh being pierced. Bakugo hung there, limp, before being tossed aside like a broken doll, crashing into the rubble near Endeavor. Kaken! Deku's voice was a raw, broken thing. He tried to move, to surge forward with Black Whip, but his body wouldn't obey. The backlash from his last 100% Detroit smash had left him nearly paralyzed. All he could do was watch. This was his fault. All of it. He should have been stronger, faster. He should have mastered One for All sooner. He was given the power to save everyone, and instead, he was presiding over their funeral. The ghosts of the previous OFA users were silent in his mind, their combined will a dull, throbbing ache. They had given him their power, their hope, and he had squandered it. Shigaraki turned his attention from the fallen heroes. His red eyes, burning with an ancient evil, scanned the battlefield and landed on a pocket of survivors. A small group of civilians, a paramedic, a few office workers, and a mother clutching her young son, were trapped in the hollow of a collapsed building, a makeshift tomb. They had been missed in the chaos, until now. A slow, horrifying smile spread across Shigaraki's chapped lips. He began to walk towards them, his pace unhurried, savoring the terror that radiated from the small group. He was going to make a point. He was going to show Deku, to show the world, the utter futility of heroism. Something inside Deku snapped. It wasn't a bone, or a muscle, or a tendon. It was the last thread of restraint, the part of him that calculated risk, that worried about self-preservation. It was the part of him that was still a student, still a boy. It simply ceased to exist. In its place was a singular, burning imperative: save them. He didn't know how. His arms wouldn't respond to his command to fire another smash. His legs buckled when he tried to stand. So he crawled. Ignoring the grinding of bone and the screeching of his own nerves, Izuku Midoriya began to crawl over the broken concrete and twisted rebar. Every movement was a fresh wave of agony, but it was distant, unimportant. The only thing that mattered was the space between the monster and the innocents. He was a broken shield, but he was still a shield. Shigaraki watched his pathetic progress with amusement. Still twitching, ninth? You are the most stubborn failure I have ever had the pleasure of meeting. You hold All Might's power, the very symbol of hope, and all it has done is prolong the suffering of those you try to protect. Let me show you mercy. Let me end it. Deku finally reached them, positioning his shattered body between Shigaraki and the family. He could hear the mother's choked sobs, feel the small boy trembling behind him. He looked up into the face of his nemesis, the red eyes that held no pity, no humanity, only an endless, consuming void. You will not touch them, Deku rasped, spitting a wad of blood onto the dusty ground. He had nothing left. No power. No tricks. No strength. One for All was a dead ember in his soul. All he had was his body, a final, fragile barrier. He spread his broken arms as wide as they would go, a grotesque parody of a welcoming embrace, meant to intercept the touch of death. This was it. The moment of pure, selfless, hopeless heroism. He was not fighting to win. He was not fighting to survive. He was a roadblock, a speed bump on the path of annihilation, existing only to buy a few meaningless seconds for strangers. In that moment, with no expectation of reward or survival, with nothing but the certainty of his own destruction, Izuku Midoriya was a hero in his purest form. Shigaraki laughed, a dry, grating sound. A noble gesture. And utterly pointless. He raised his hand, fingers splayed, the catalyst for the end of everything. The air crackled with anticipation. The mother behind Deku squeezed her eyes shut. Deku stared defiantly into the abyss, and then the sky tore open. It wasn't a sound of thunder, or an explosion, or anything born of earth. It was the sound of fabric, the very fabric of reality, being ripped in two. A high-pitched, harmonic scream filled the air, overriding every other sound on the battlefield. Every head, hero and villain alike, snapped upwards. A brilliant, piercing light blazed through the soot-blackened clouds. It wasn't a meteor, for it moved with purpose. It wasn't a ship, for it was too small, too solid. It was a star, a shard of impossible celestial fire, trailing a corona of crackling, raw lightning. It descended with breathtaking speed, aimed not for Gigantomachia, not for the city at large, but for the single point of absolute conflict, the space between Izuku Midoriya and Tamura Shigaraki. Time seemed to warp, to stretch and slow. Shigaraki's hand, inches from Deku's face, froze in midair. The world held its breath. The falling star hit the ground with the force of an artillery shell and the finality of a god's judgment. Boom! The impact was absolute. A shockwave of pure concussive force erupted outwards, not of fire or shrapnel, but of displaced air and something else, something ancient and powerful. It wasn't destructive like decay, it was declarative. It was a statement of arrival. Shigaraki was thrown backward, tumbling end over end like a rag doll, his concentration broken. Deku and the civilians behind him were shielded by the epicenter of the blast, but the sheer force of it pressed them into the rubble. The dust and debris kicked up by the impact hung in the air for a long moment, a thick, swirling curtain. Silence descended upon the battlefield. Gigantomachia paused his rampage, tilting his massive, simple head in confusion. Endeavor, leaning heavily on a piece of debris, stared into the cloud, his flames flickering with uncertainty. From the ground, Bakugo stirred, a pained groan escaping his lips as he forced an eye open. As the dust began to settle, a crater was revealed. It was perfectly circular, about 20 feet in diameter, the earth at its center vitrified into a dark, glassy stone. And in the very middle of that crater, nestled in the newly formed obsidian, lay an object. It was a hammer. It was brutally simple in its design. A blocky, rectangular head of a dull, gray metal that seemed to drink the light around it, etched with fine, intricate lines that spiraled into patterns that defied modern comprehension. The handle was short, wrapped in worn brown leather, with a simple loop at the end. It radiated no light, no sound, no obvious power. It was just a hammer. An old, plain, unremarkable war hammer, yet its presence had silenced a war. Shigaraki was the first to recover. He pushed himself to his feet, his body already knitting itself back together. His face was no longer amused. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated fury mixed with a sliver of confusion. This was an anomaly. A variable he hadn't accounted for. "What is this?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. "Another one of your tricks, hero? A support item from overseas?" He strode to the edge of the crater, his red eyes fixed on the hammer. He could feel something emanating from it. Not power in the way he understood it, not a quirk, but something primordial. Something vast. It annoyed him. All for one's insatiable curiosity and lust for power surged within him. He had to have it. He had to understand it. He slid down into the crater, his boots crunching on the glassy ground. He reached down and wrapped his hand around the leather-bound handle, all 5 fingers making contact. He braced himself, expecting a surge of energy, a new quirk to analyze and add to his collection. Nothing happened. He pulled. The hammer didn't budge. It was as if he were trying to lift the planet itself. He gritted his teeth, his muscles bulging. His super regeneration worked in overdrive, pumping strength into his limbs. He, who could level a city with a thought, who possessed the strength of 100 men, could not lift a simple lump of metal. "What?" he whispered, his voice laced with disbelief. He tried again, pulling with all his might, a frustrated scream tearing from his throat. The hammer remained perfectly still, an immovable monument to his inadequacy. From across the battlefield, everyone watched, transfixed. A member of the Paranormal Liberation Front, a man with a minor strength-enhancing quirk, scrambled into the crater to help his master. He, too, grabbed the hammer. Together they pulled, their faces turning purple with effort. It was useless. Rage, pure and absolute, consumed Shigaraki. This was an insult. A cosmic joke at his expense. He raised his other hand, intending to turn the infuriating object and the very ground it sat on to dust, but he hesitated. Some deep, primal instinct, a whisper from the core of all for one's accumulated memories, screamed at him not to. It warned him that to try and unmake this object would be to invite an unmaking of his own. He let go, stumbling back, his chest heaving. "It's nothing," he spat, trying to regain his composure. A trick. A worthless piece of metal. But his eyes betrayed his words. They kept darting back to the hammer, filled with a mixture of desire and fear. On the other side of the crater, Deku pushed himself up. His body was still a wreck, but the immediate threat was gone. He stared at the hammer, his analytical mind, even in its fog of pain, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a weapon he recognized. It wasn't technology. It was other, and it was calling to him. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't a thought. It was a feeling. A low, resonant hum that vibrated not in his ears, but in the marrow of his bones, in the core of his spirit. It felt like the distant rumble of thunder on a clear summer day. It felt like home. He didn't know why. He didn't know what it was. He only knew that he had to reach it. He began to move again. Not crawling this time, but stumbling, dragging one shattered leg behind the other. He slid into the crater, his movements clumsy and agonizingly slow. The civilians he had protected watched him with wide, terrified eyes. The heroes watched with bated breath. The villains watched with scorn and confusion. What is that idiot doing now? Bakugo rasped from his position in the rubble, his voice weak but still full of its characteristic bite. Shigaraki watched Deku's approach, a sneer returning to his face. Yes, go on, you broken symbol. Try to lift the unliftable. Show them all how pathetic you truly are before I erase you from existence. Deku ignored him. He ignored everything. His world had shrunk to the space between himself and the hammer. He fell to his knees before it, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. His vision was tunneling, the edges turning dark. He was bleeding out, internally and externally. This was his last act. He reached out a trembling, blood-soaked hand. His fingers, mangled and purple, brushed against the worn leather of the handle. The moment his skin made contact, a circuit was completed across the cosmos. The low hum in his bones erupted into a deafening roar. The intricate lines etched into the hammer's head, previously dull and lifeless, blazed with an incandescent blue-white light. Runes. They were ancient runes, and they sang a song of creation, of storms and stars and valor. The world went white. A soundless, impossible clap of thunder echoed not from the sky, but from the hammer itself. And in response, the heavens answered. The soot-choked clouds were ripped asunder, as if by an invisible hand. From the depths of the sky, from a place far beyond the stratosphere, a single, colossal bolt of lightning descended. It was not the jagged, chaotic energy of a natural storm. This was a pillar of pure, concentrated power, a spear of divine judgment hurled from the heavens. It struck the hammer. And through the hammer, it struck Izuku Midoriya. He screamed, but his voice was lost in the cosmic roar. The lightning did not burn him. It did not destroy him. It poured into him. He felt it surge through his veins, a cleansing, terrifying fire. It cauterized his wounds, mended his fractured bones, and knitted his torn muscles back together with agonizing speed. The exhaustion, the soul-deep weariness that had been dragging him into the grave, was incinerated, replaced by a surge of power so vast, so overwhelming. It made one for all feel like a flickering candle in a hurricane. His eyes, once dull with pain, snapped open, and they were no longer green. They were blazing pools of electric blue, crackling with the untamed fury of the storm. His messy green hair whipped around his head in a phantom wind, lit from within by arcs of stray electricity. He pushed himself to his feet, not with the pained effort of before, but with a fluid, effortless grace. He stood tall in the center of the crater, the column of celestial lightning still pouring into him, a conduit between Midgard and the heavens. He closed his hand, and the hammer, Mjolnir, lifted from the ground as if it were a weightless extension of his own arm. He felt its name echo in his soul. He felt its history, its power, its purpose. And he felt the single, simple inscription that now burned in his mind as if branded there by the Allfather himself. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. The lightning subsided, but the power remained, a coiled serpent of potential energy thrumming just beneath his skin. The air around him crackled, heavy with the scent of rain and ozone. He looked across the crater at Shigaraki, and for the first time in this long, horrific day, he did not feel fear. He did not feel despair. He felt the roar of thunder waiting to be unleashed. The darkest hour of Midgard had just ended. The age of a new hero had just begun. The lightning did not feel like burning. It was a sensation beyond temperature, a torrent of pure being that flooded every cell of Izuku Midoriya's body. For a single, eternal moment, he was not a boy in a broken city. He was a vessel for the storm, a conduit for the raw, untamed power that sings between the stars. He felt his bones, not mending, but being reforged. The hairline fractures and splintered fragments that riddled his arms and legs were filled with a light that felt like molten gold, sealing them not just to their original state, but to something stronger, denser. His torn muscles, stretched and shredded by the reckless use of One for All, were rewoven thread by thread with filaments of celestial energy. The agony that had been his constant companion for hours was not merely numbed, it was annihilated, burned away like dross in a divine crucible. Exhaustion, a leaden weight that had been dragging his very soul into the abyss, was vaporized. In its place, a new energy surged, an ocean of power so vast it made the raging river of One for All feel like a tributary. He could feel both powers within him now, separate but intertwined. One for All was a chorus of 8 determined human voices, a legacy of sweat, blood, and sacrifice passed down through generations. This new power was different. It was the singular, resonant boom of a cosmic drum, a power ancient and elemental, humming with the authority of creation itself. The pillar of light from the heavens receded, but the power it had delivered remained, a tempest coiled in his gut. The world swam back into focus. He stood in the center of the crater, Mjolnir held firmly in his right hand. It felt impossibly light, perfectly balanced, as if it had been forged for his grip alone. The leather-wrapped handle was a conduit, channeling the storm that now lived within him. He looked up. His tattered, blood-soaked costume whipped around him in a wind that had no earthly source. Small, harmless arcs of blue electricity danced across his knuckles and flickered at the edges of his green hair. He blinked, and the very air in front of him seemed to crackle. He could see the electromagnetic fields of the city, the faint energy signatures of the people around him, the malevolent, corrupted aura that poured from his enemy. Tamura Shigaraki stood 20 feet away, his face a canvas of disbelief, fury, and something Deku had never seen there before, a flicker of genuine apprehension. The god of ruin was confused. A quirk, Shigaraki hissed, the words a desperate attempt to categorize, to control what he was seeing. All for One's voice bled through, analytical and cold. Some kind of energy absorption and amplification? A healing factor tied to an electrical source? No. This is not a quirk. I cannot feel its source. I cannot touch it. For the first time, the symbol of evil sounded truly lost. But the rage quickly returned. Shigaraki would not be upstaged by a miracle. He would tear it apart, grind it to dust, and prove that in the end, only decay was absolute. Whatever you are now, he screamed, his voice cracking with psychotic fury, you will still be erased. He lunged forward, not with his fists, but with his primary weapon. He thrust his palm forward, and a wave of gray annihilation surged from him. It was a tide of absolute entropy, a tsunami of dust that rushed across the crater floor. The vitrified rocket touch dissolved instantly, unwritten from the book of existence. It was the end of all things, given form and purpose, and it was aimed directly at Deku. Deku's mind, which usually raced with 1,000 strategic possibilities and panicked what-ifs, was suddenly, preternaturally calm. The storm within him knew what to do. There was no thought, only instinct. He did not dodge. He did not retreat. He planted his feet, raised Mjolnir, and swung. It was not a swing of desperation like his previous smashes. It was a gesture of command. As the hammer arced through the air, it drew the latent power from within him and gave it form. A wave of brilliant, blue-white lightning erupted from the head of Mjolnir, not a single bolt, but a wide, roaring sheet of pure energy. It met the onrushing tide of decay halfway across the crater. The collision was a war between two opposing concepts of reality. Decay was the principle of unmaking. It sought to break bonds, to return everything to its most basic, disordered state. The lightning was pure, ordered energy. It was the force that forged stars and sparked life. Where the two forces met, reality itself seemed to stutter. The air screamed. For a moment, there was a violent, shimmering line of pure chaos between them, a wall of static where dust and plasma fought for dominance. Then, the lightning won. It did not overpower the decay. It neutralized it. The chaotic, unmaking energy of Shigaraki's quirk was simply cancelled out, its command to dissolve matter overridden by the lightning's fundamental authority. The gray tide vanished, leaving behind nothing but the crackling ozone scent of the storm. Silence. Every hero still conscious, every villain still standing, watched in stunned disbelief. Endeavor's flames sputtered. Shoto's jaw hung open. From the rubble, Katsuki Bakugo pushed himself up on one elbow, his crimson eyes wide with an emotion he couldn't name. He had just witnessed the unstoppable force of Shigaraki's decay be stopped. Not by strength, not by sacrifice, but by a simple, elegant rebuttal. Shigaraki himself froze, his hands still outstretched. He stared at the empty space where his power should have been, then at Deku, who stood untouched, the hammer humming softly in his hand. How? The question was a whisper of pure shock. Deku didn't answer. His gaze lifted, moving past Shigaraki to the larger threat still looming over the battlefield. Gigantomachia, who had been momentarily stunned by the hammer's arrival, was beginning to stir again. His massive head turned, his single, dim-witted eye fixing on the source of the strange new power. With a roar that shook the foundations of the ruined city, he began to lumber forward, ready to crush the anomaly that had interrupted his master's victory. The heroes tensed, whatever strength they had left marshalling for another hopeless charge. But Deku acted first. He looked at the hammer in his hand, then at the advancing mountain of flesh. A new knowledge bloomed in his mind, unbidden, as natural as breathing. It will always return. He spun on his heel, his body moving with a coiled grace he had never possessed. He put his entire being into the motion, not just the physical strength of his newly healed body, not just the stockpiled power of One for All, but the torrential might of the storm itself. He released Mjolnir. The hammer flew. It didn't arc through the air like a thrown object. It shot forward like a missile, a gray, thunderous blur that broke the sound barrier with a deafening crack. It was surrounded by a sheath of lightning, a self-contained thunderbolt that left a trail of ionized air in its wake. It crossed the half-mile distance to Gigantomachia in less than a second. The giant had no time to react. He was raising a fist the size of a bus to smash a group of retreating heroes when Mjolnir struck him square in the forehead. The impact was not a fleshy thud. It was a cataclysmic event. A peal of thunder so loud it shattered every remaining window in a 10-block radius erupted from the point of contact. The lightning sheath discharged directly into the giant's skull. For a moment, Gigantomachia's entire skeleton was visible through his thick hide, illuminated in a grotesque, flashing X-ray. His roar was cut short, replaced by a gargled cry of pure, unadulterated pain. His eyes rolled back in his head. The giant, who had shrugged off prominence burns and tanked blows from a dozen pro-heroes without flinching, stumbled backward. 1 step. 2 steps. His immense weight cracked the very bedrock beneath his feet. He swayed like a felled redwood, before crashing onto his back with a ground-shaking impact that registered on seismographs across the country. He wasn't dead, but he was down, twitching and stunned, out of the fight for the foreseeable future. The hammer, its momentum seemingly spent, did not fall to the ground. It hovered in the air for a single, impossible beat, spinning lazily over the downed giant. Then, it pivoted and shot back the way it came, a loyal hawk returning to its master. It flew with the same incredible speed, letting out a sharp, whistling sound as it cut through the air. Deku simply raised his hand, and Mjolnir slapped back into his palm with a solid, satisfying thwump. The sense of completeness returned, the circuit of power whole once more. He turned his glowing blue eyes back to Shigaraki. The battlefield was utterly silent, save for the hum of power emanating from Deku and the distant groan of the fallen giant. The remaining villains, Dabi, his flames flickering nervously, Mr. Compress, his theatricality gone, replaced by stark fear, Spinner, looking between his master and the impossible hero in utter confusion, were paralyzed. It was in that moment that All for One made his decision. The cold, pragmatic calculus of the master manipulator overrode Shigaraki's seething, emotional rage. For centuries, All for One had operated on a simple, effective principle: understand, steal, and control. Every quirk, every person, was a known quantity, a piece on a chessboard he had long since mastered. This was not a piece on the board. This was the hand of a new, unknown player sweeping the existing pieces aside. This power, it has no source I can discern. All for One's thoughts echoed in the prison of Shigaraki's mind, a voice of chilling reason amidst the fury. My senses reach for it, and they find nothing. No genetic marker. No stored energy. It is an authority I did not grant and cannot seize. It is an ontological error in the world I have built. I can still kill him. Shigaraki screamed internally, his own consciousness fighting for control. I can still decay him. I just need to touch him. And what if you fail? All for One countered calmly. What if that weapon can channel that energy directly into you? Your hyperregeneration is formidable, but it is not absolute. We have seen what it did to the giant. To continue this fight is to gamble our very existence against an unknown variable. That is not strategy. That is suicide. The logic was undeniable. The primary objective, the acquisition of One for All, was now secondary to the preservation of their primary asset, the vessel of Tamura Shigaraki. Shigaraki's body trembled, his fists clenching and unclenching. The red light in his eyes flickered as the two wills warred within him. Finally, All for One's cold pragmatism won out. This isn't over, Ninth, Shigaraki snarled, his voice a blend of his own youthful rasp and All for One's deep baritone. The words were for Deku, but the decision was a command to his forces. This changes nothing. The world will still rot. We will still tear it all down. It was a desperate attempt to frame a retreat as a choice, to maintain some semblance of control. But everyone present knew what it was, a rout. From Shigaraki's back, a dozen black tendrils, different from the rivet stabs, shot out. These were tipped with a viscous, dark liquid. They latched onto the dazed forms of Dabi, Compress, and Spinner. Simultaneously, a swirling, dark portal, courtesy of a stolen warping quirk, opened behind him. Next time we meet, Shigaraki roared, as his tendrils began to drag his subordinates toward the portal, I will peel that power from your bones. He cast one last look at Deku, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred, and then allowed himself to be pulled back into the shimmering darkness. The portal snapped shut with a sound like tearing cloth, and just like that they were gone. The departure of the villains left a vacuum, a sudden, profound silence that was more deafening than the battle itself. The roar of explosions, the crash of crumbling buildings, the screams of the fighting, all gone. All that remained was the whisper of the wind through the ruins, the distant wail of approaching sirens, and the faint, rhythmic crackle of energy that still emanated from Izuku Midoriya. The war was over. For a long moment, no one moved. The remaining heroes, battered, bleeding, and exhausted beyond measure, simply stood, or knelt, or lay where they were, processing the impossible reality of their victory. They had been losing. Minutes ago, they had been on the verge of total annihilation. Now, the enemy was gone, and the catastrophic threat was neutralized. And it was all because of him. All eyes turned to the boy in the crater. Endeavor, the number one hero, leaned heavily against a slab of concrete, his body steaming. His armor was cracked, his face was a mask of soot and blood, but his expression was one of pure, uncomprehending awe. His own flames, the pinnacle of firepower in their society, seemed like a child's sparklers compared to the divine judgment he had just witnessed. He looked at Deku, then at his own hands, and for the first time in his life, he felt truly powerless. Shoto, his body aching, pushed himself to his feet. He stared at his friend, his usual stoicism completely shattered. Midoriya. He breathed, the name a question, a statement, and a prayer all at once. What was that? From a few yards away, a pained, furious sound cut through the silence. DKU. It was Bakugo. He was on his feet, staggering, clutching the bleeding wounds in his side. Best Jeanist was trying to support him, but Bakugo shoved him away. He was staring at Deku, his face a maelstrom of emotions, rage, confusion, relief, and a deep, gnawing frustration that went beyond simple rivalry. What the hell was that? He bellowed, his voice raw. First a borrowed quirk, now a magic space hammer? When the fuck do you start pulling your own weight, you damn nerd? It was his way of asking, how? How do you keep doing this? How do you keep finding new ways to leave me in the dust? It was a cry of utter, infuriating bewilderment from a boy who had always believed he understood the rules of power. Miles away, in a fortified underground command center, the tension was so thick it was a physical presence. On a massive central monitor, the live satellite feed of Jaka's city was displayed in stark, high-definition clarity. Pro-heroes, government officials, and support staff had been watching the live broadcast of their own extinction. Tashinori Yagi, known to the world as All Might, sat hunched in a chair before the screen. In his skeletal form, he looked impossibly fragile, a ghost haunting the memory of his former glory. He had watched Shigaraki's rampage, had seen Endeavor falter, had witnessed young Bakugo being impaled. Every blow to the heroes on the field had been a physical blow to him, the helplessness a cancer eating at his soul. He had felt the hope of a generation, the hope he had personally fostered, being systematically extinguished. He had watched his boy, his successor, crawl through the dirt to make one final, suicidal stand. And his heart had shattered into a million pieces. Then the sky had ripped open. He had watched, along with everyone else in the room, as the impossible happened. The falling star. The hammer. The lightning. He saw young Midoriya stand, not just healed, but transformed, wielding a power that defied every law of quirks and nature he had ever known. He watched him turn back decay, fell the unbeatable giant, and single-handedly rout the most dangerous force their world had ever seen. The room was silent, the only sound the quiet hum of the servers. An official dropped her tablet, the clatter echoing loudly in the stillness. Mizu, the principal of UA, stood on his chair, his paws clasped behind his back, his normally inscrutable expression one of wide-eyed fascination. But Tashinori saw none of it. His gaze was fixed on the screen, on the image of the boy standing tall in the crater, the storm still crackling in his eyes. He saw the weight of a new, unimaginable burden settle onto those young shoulders, a burden even greater than one for all. A single, hot tear traced a path through the gaunt landscape of his cheek. Then another. Soon, a quiet, choked sob escaped his lips. The men and women in the room respectfully pretended not to notice. They weren't tears of sadness or grief. They were tears of overwhelming, incomprehensible relief. Tears of awe. Tears of pride so fierce it physically hurt. He had passed on his torch, fearing its light would be the last. But he had just witnessed his successor ignite a star. Back in the crater, the weight of the moment finally came crashing down on Deku. The divine energy that had suffused him, healed him, and guided him began to recede, not vanishing, but settling deep within him, becoming a dormant reservoir rather than an active torrent. As it pulled back, the mortal realities of his existence rushed back in. The preternatural calm evaporated, replaced by the familiar, chaotic buzz of his own thoughts. Shigaraki, he got away. Gigantomachia is down, but what about the others? Is everyone okay? Kaken. He was hurt. And Todoroki. And Endeavor. The adrenaline of the fight, a sensation now dwarfed by the cosmic power he had wielded, vanished in an instant. He was left with the crash. The mental and emotional exhaustion from the entire war, from months of relentless pressure and fear, slammed into him like a physical blow. The sensory overload of feeling the storm, of wielding Mjolnir, had been a strain on his mind that he was only now beginning to register. His brain felt like a fried circuit board. The brilliant blue light in his eyes flickered, then faded back to their normal, vibrant green. The phantom wind died down. The crackling energy around his body dissipated. He was just Izuku Midoriya again, a 16-year-old boy standing in the middle of a war zone. He swayed on his feet, his vision blurring. The world tilted on its axis. He heard Bakugo's faint, angry shout, saw the blurry shapes of other heroes beginning to move towards him. The hammer in his hand suddenly felt heavy. Impossibly, damningly heavy. The connection, the feeling of it being an extension of his arm, was gone. Now it was just a massive, dense block of alien metal. His fingers, weak and trembling, could no longer support its weight. Mjolnir slipped from his grasp. It fell the short distance to the vitrified ground, landing with a solid, final thud that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. And then, his legs gave out. The last of his strength gone, Izuku Midoriya crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he even hit the floor, collapsing into a heap beside the unmovable hammer that had chosen him as its champion. The first sensation was the beeping. It was a soft, rhythmic counterpoint to the profound darkness, a metronome marking time in a void where time had no meaning. It was insistent, sterile, and utterly mundane. For Izuku Midoriya, it was the sound of survival. He had heard it enough times from hospital bedsides, his own and others, to recognize its clinical lullaby. The darkness began to recede, not into light, but into a murky gray awareness. He felt the scratch of starched sheets against his skin and the dull, phantom ache in his limbs, the memory of injuries that were no longer there. He could smell the antiseptic tang of a recovery room, a scent as familiar to him as the sweat of his own training. He was safe. He was alive. But he was not alone in the dark. A deeper silence lay beneath the beeping, a heavy, expectant quiet that held the weight of the world. He could feel the presence of others, their anxieties a palpable force in the room. He strained to open his eyes, but his eyelids were leaden shutters. In the stark white light of the UA High School Emergency Medical Wing, a facility now more akin to a military field hospital, Toshinori Yagi watched the boy on the bed. The rhythmic rise and fall of his chest was the most beautiful sight in the world. He sat in a simple chair, his skeletal frame folded in on itself, looking less like the former symbol of peace and more like a deeply worried father. He was not the only one keeping vigil. Standing by the reinforced window, staring out at the smoke-stained twilight, was Principal Nizu. The small, mammalian creature's usual cheerful demeanor was replaced by a look of intense, analytical concentration. His paws were clasped behind his back, his tail twitching ever so slightly. His vitals are remarkably stable, a stern, familiar voice cut through the silence. Recovery girl, Chio Shizenji, was studying a series of scans displayed on a floating holographic monitor. Her expression was a mixture of professional satisfaction and utter scientific bewilderment. In fact, they're more than stable. They're perfect. Too perfect. She swiped a hand through the air, bringing up a cellular scan. There's no trace of the injuries he sustained. Not a single hairline fracture. No muscle tears. No internal bleeding. It's not like my quirk, which accelerates a body's natural healing process. This is recreation. His cellular structure shows evidence of catastrophic damage that was somehow, instantly and perfectly repaired. There's a residual energy signature I've never seen before. Faint traces of ozone and something else my equipment can't even classify. Nizu turned from the window, his black eyes glinting. And the object? He gestured with his head to the center of the room. On a reinforced plasteel examination table, surrounded by a perimeter of sophisticated scanning equipment that was currently powered down, sat the hammer, Mjolnir. It looked profoundly out of place in the sterile environment, like a Viking artifact placed in the middle of a spaceship's bridge. It was inert, silent, and radiated an aura of immense, patient antiquity. We followed protocol, a grim-faced man in a black suit from the Hero Public Safety Commission reported. He and his partner stood stiffly by the door, their presence a constant, low-level source of tension. We attempted to secure the asset. Ectoplasm created 10 clones to attempt to lift. They failed. The agents from my personal security detail, including one with a high-level strength enhancement quirk, were unable to budge it. We brought in a portable magnetic resonance scanner and a quantum particle detector. The former couldn't penetrate its surface, and the latter simply malfunctioned. It's made of a metal that doesn't correspond to anything on the periodic table, or any known alloy. The agent's gaze fell on the hammer, a flicker of fear in his professional calm. It's not a piece of technology, sir. It's a piece of physics that shouldn't exist. Toshinori's gaze never left his successor. He had heard their reports for hours. He knew all of this. But his mind was on a different plane of existence. He had held a secret, a legacy of power passed from one person to another, a torch against the darkness. He had communed with the ghosts of his predecessors. He was, perhaps, the only person in the room equipped to even begin to accept the possibility of what this meant. He had dealt with the legacy of man. This felt like the intervention of a god. He had watched the footage from Jakku 100 times. He had seen the look in his boy's eyes in that final moment before the star fell. It was the same look he had seen in his master, Nana Shimura's, eyes before she faced All for One. The look of someone who had already accepted their own death for the sake of others. The absolute, defining quality of a true hero. If he be worthy, a voice seemed to whisper in the back of his mind. He didn't know where the words came from, but they felt true. Whatever had happened, young Midoriya had earned it. Our priority, Nizu said, his voice bringing Toshinori back to the present, is twofold. First, the boy's well-being. Second, understanding what we are now dealing with. The world has changed. The public saw a miracle, but we, in this room, see a paradigm shift of potentially cosmic proportions. Quark society is based on the quantifiable, the genetic, the known. This, he gestured to the hammer, is the unknown. And the unknown is a variable that can be either a shield or a weapon of unimaginable power. The HPSC agent nodded grimly. When he wakes, he will need to be debriefed. Thoroughly. We need to know where it came from, how it works, and if it can be controlled, or replicated. Toshinori's head snapped up, a dangerous fire in his sunken eyes. He is not an experiment. He is a hero. A child who just saved all of us. He will be given time to heal, physically and mentally, before he is subjected to any interrogation. The agent took a half-step back, momentarily cowed by the ghost of All Might's authority. Before he could respond, Recovery Girl cleared her throat. He's stirring, she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. His brainwave activity is increasing. He's entering a state of REM. He's dreaming. Every eye in the room turned back to the boy on the bed. His face, peaceful until now, began to twitch. A slight frown creased his brow. His breathing hitched. In the silent, sterile hospital room, Izuka Midoriya was a million miles away. The beeping faded. The scent of antiseptic was replaced by the smell of damp earth, night-blooming flowers, and the clean, sharp tang of ozone, like the air after a summer thunderstorm. The darkness behind his eyes gave way, not to the harsh light of a medical facility, but to the gentle, silver-pewter glow of 1,000 unfamiliar constellations. He was no longer lying down. He was standing. He looked down and saw not a hospital gown, but his own tattered hero costume, miraculously whole again. Beneath his feet was not tile, but soft, cool grass, wet with a dew that sparkled like diamond dust. He stood in a vast, open meadow under a sky that was a tapestry of shimmering nebulae and rivers of starlight. The air was cool and still, and the silence was absolute, a profound and holy quiet that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe. In the center of the meadow, dominating the horizon and reaching up into the cosmic sea above, was a tree. To call it a tree was a profound understatement. It was a force of nature given form. Its trunk was wider than a mountain range, its bark a gnarled, ancient map of history. Its roots, thick as highways, plunged deep into the earth, but also seemed to spread out into the void, drinking from wells of darkness between the stars. Its branches were colossal, each one a world unto itself, and they stretched up so high that they did not bear leaves, but held entire galaxies in their embrace. He could see the swirling arms of a spiral galaxy caught in one bough, a cluster of newborn suns glittering in another. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed his rational mind, that he was looking at Yggdrasil. The world tree. The axis of reality. He was so captivated by the sight that he didn't notice the figure approaching until he was only a few dozen yards away. It was an old man, walking with a steady, unhurried gait. He leaned on a simple wooden staff, and he wore the humble, earth-toned robes of a traveler. A wide-brimmed hat cast his face in shadow, but Deku could see a long, silver-white beard that reached his chest. He radiated an aura not of overwhelming power, but of immense, ancient wisdom. He looked like a wanderer, a pilgrim who had walked the secret paths of the world since the dawn of time. As he drew closer, the old man looked up, and Deku felt his breath catch in his throat. One of the man's eyes was a piercing, brilliant blue, sharp and intelligent, an eye that saw not just what was, but what could be. The other eye socket was an empty hollow, a dark scar that spoke of a sacrifice made for a knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. Deku's mind, the mind of a hero analyst, a quirk nerd, a student of the modern world, went completely blank. He had no frame of reference for this, no theory, no explanation. He could only stare. The old man stopped a few feet away, his single eye gazing at Deku with a look that was neither friendly nor hostile, but deeply appraising. He seemed to be weighing Deku's very soul. "You are far from home, son of Midgard," the man said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone, like the grinding of ancient stones. It was a voice that had given commands that shaped nations and whispered secrets that birthed myths. Deku found his own voice, and it was a small, reedy thing in the vast silence. Where am I? Who are you?" The man smiled, a faint, weary thing. You are in a place of seeing. A reflection of the true foundation of things. As for who I am, I have been called many names. Wanderer. Giver of victory. All-Father. But you may call me Odin. The name hung in the air, freighted with the weight of forgotten ages. Odin. A name from a dead religion, a character from myth and legend, a god from the pages of dusty books, and yet, standing here before him, he was more real than anything Deku had ever known. That's impossible, Deku stammered, his analytical mind trying and failing to find a foothold. You're from Norse mythology. You're not real. Odin's smile didn't waver. Your reality is but one leaf on one branch of a very large tree, young one. What you call myth is often just the echo of a truth too large for a world to hold. I am as real as the hammer that now rests by your bedside. The mention of the hammer jolted Deku. The hammer. Mjolnir. What happened? How did it get there? How did I sent it, Odin said simply, his voice taking on a graver tone. My throne on Asgard allows me to peer through the Bifrost, to gaze across the 9 realms. For some time, I have watched your world, Midgard. I have seen its wonders, your quirks, your cities of glass and light. But I have also watched a shadow grow. He gestured with his staff toward the stardusted sky. I watched as your world began its unmaking. I saw a man who was not a man, a vessel for an ancient hunger, who wielded the power of nullity, a cancer of entropy that sought to dissolve your reality into dust and silence. I listened as your world screamed while it was being unwritten. Odin's eye fixed on Deku, the intensity of his gaze pinning him in place. My son Thor, the rightful wielder of Mjolnir, is occupied. He fights battles at the edge of creation against whispers of a coming winter that threatens all the realms. I could not send him. But I could not stand by and watch a world burn. He took a step closer. And so, I sought a champion. Not the strongest, not the fastest. Power is common in the cosmos. I have seen beings who can extinguish suns with a breath. No, power was not what was needed. Your world was drowning in power. It needed worth. He paused, letting the words settle in the cool air. I sought a warrior with the heart of a king and the spirit of selfless sacrifice. I looked for one who, in the moment of absolute despair, with no hope of victory or survival, would still choose to become a shield for the innocent. Odin's eye seemed to see right through Deku, back to that moment in the crater. The crawling, the pain, the acceptance of his own end simply to buy a few seconds for a mother and her child. I found you, Izuku Midoriya, Odin said, speaking his name for the first time. I saw you, broken and bleeding, with an empty well of power, offering up your own body to stop the tide. In Midgard's darkest hour, you were its brightest light. A hero not because of the power you wielded, but because of the choice you made when you had no power left. A lump formed in Deku's throat. He had felt like a failure in that moment, a pathetic, crawling wreck. But this ancient, one-eyed god was telling him that was his moment of greatest triumph. So I acted, Odin continued, his voice resonating with ancient magic. I took Mjolnir, and upon it I renewed an old enchantment. I cast it out from Asgard's halls, across the void, and sent it to you, not as a gift, but as an answer. The hammer did not make you worthy, boy. It came to you because you already were. The revelation washed over Deku, a dizzying wave of understanding and disbelief. The hammer, the lightning, the healing, it was all a response to his final, hopeless act. The power, Deku whispered, looking at his own hands. I felt a storm. And one for all, it felt calmer, stronger. Mjolnir's power is that of the storm, the fury of the heavens bound to the will of a worthy wielder, Odin explained. It is divine, elemental energy. It stabilized the chaotic, volatile power you carry within you, the echoes of the dead. It provided a perfect conduit, a lightning rod to ground the storm of souls you hold. The two powers will work in synergy, if you learn to listen to them both. Deku's mind was racing, trying to process the sheer scale of what he was being told. Asgard. The 9 realms. Thor. Odin. It was too much. So, what now? He asked, the question sounding small and childish. Do I give it back? Odin let out a soft, dry chuckle. Mjolnir is not a tool to be borrowed and returned, child. It is a companion. It has chosen you, and you have proven worthy of it. The hammer is now yours to bear, for as long as you remain worthy. For as long as you remain the man who is willing to die for strangers in the dust. The implication of those words sent a shiver down Deku's spine. For as long as I remain worthy. The power wasn't a permanent gift. It was conditional. A trust he had to earn, every single day. You are no longer just the ninth holder of One for All, Odin declared, his voice losing its gentle, instructive tone and taking on the weight of kingly decree. You are now Midgard's champion. Its protector. In the eyes of the Nine Realms, you are its god of thunder. The title was so immense, so heavy, that Deku felt his knees might buckle. God of Thunder. Him? The quirkless boy who used to cry after every fight. I can't be, he stammered. I'm just a student. I'm not a god. The title is a reflection of the power you now wield, not a statement of your nature, Odin corrected him gently. But you must understand, this power is a gift, but also a terrible responsibility. It is a beacon. Odin's expression grew grim, his single eye looking past Deku, into the swirling nebulae. The events in Jaka's city did not go unnoticed. The fall of a star, the roar of divine thunder. Such things send ripples throughout the branches of Yggdrasil. The entity you call All for One is a formidable cancer upon your world, but he is a creature of your world. He is a known quantity. You have now lit a fire in the cosmic dark, boy. And fire attracts moths. A cold dread, colder than any fear he had felt facing Shigaraki, trickled down Deku's spine. There are forces beyond quirks, beyond the understanding of your people, Odin warned, his voice a low whisper. Kings of shadow and fire who rule realms of eternal twilight. Creatures that swim in the void between worlds, feasting on the light of hope. Sorcerers who can unwrite reality with a word. They are aware of Midgard in a way they were not before. They are aware of you. You have painted a target on your world, and on your back. The weight of it all was crushing. He had just survived one apocalypse, only to be told he had invited a dozen more. He felt a familiar wave of panic, the overwhelming sense that he was not strong enough, not ready. Odin seemed to sense his fear. He placed a heavy, calloused hand on Deku's shoulder. It felt surprisingly real, grounding. You will not be alone, the Allfather said, his voice softening once more. The hammer itself holds a portion of my son's spirit, his millennia of battle experience. It will guide your hand when your mind falters. And the legacy you already carry, the voices of the heroes who came before you, listen to them. Their strength is human, and that is a power Asgardians often forget. He squeezed Deku's shoulder. Courage is not the absence of fear, Izuka Midoriya. It is the will to act in spite of it. You have already proven you possess that will in abundance. Odin removed his hand and took a step back. The edges of the dreamscape began to shimmer, the brilliant stars wavering like reflections in water. My time to speak with you grows short, Odin said, his form becoming slightly translucent. Remember what I have told you. The power is yours, as is the burden. Wield it wisely. Protect your home. And above all, stay true to the heart that called the thunder down from the heavens. The dream was dissolving, the scent of ozone, and the sight of Yggdrasil fading back into the sterile beeping of the hospital room. Odin's figure was almost gone, a ghostly silhouette against the dying starlight. Wait! Deku cried out, reaching for him. How do I do it? How can I be strong enough? Odin's final words echoed in his mind, not as a sound, but as a thought, imprinted directly onto his soul as the last vestiges of the dream vanished. Prove my choice was not in error, son of Midgard. And then, there was only darkness. Izuka Midoriya's eyes snapped open. The harsh fluorescent light of the ceiling blinded him for a moment. The beeping of the heart monitor was loud, grating. He was back. He was in his body. He took a sharp, gasping breath, his lungs filling with the sterile air. He's awake! He turned his head. All Might, Nizu, Recovery Girl, and two grim-faced men in suits were staring at him. He was the center of attention, the focal point of all their hopes and fears. He slowly pushed himself up into a sitting position. His body felt incredible. Not just healed, but vibrant, thrumming with a low-level energy he'd never felt before. He looked at his hands, turning them over. They were his hands, but they felt new. Young Midoriya, All Might said, his voice thick with emotion as he took a step closer. How do you feel? Deku looked around the room, his eyes falling on the hammer resting on the table. It looked so ordinary, so plain, but he could feel it now, a faint, sleeping hum in the back of his mind, a connection, a promise. He looked back at the worried faces of his mentors, at the calculating eyes of the government officials, at the impossible, mythological truth resting on the table, and he tried to find the words to explain what had just happened. He tried to bridge the gap between their world of quirks and science, and the world of gods and magic he had just visited. He took another breath, his mind still reeling from the cosmic scope of his dream, from the weight of Odin's words. All he could manage was a simple, world-altering statement. He said, his voice hoarse. I had a dream. The silence that followed Izuku Midoriya's declaration was a living thing. It filled the sterile hospital room, pressing in on the occupants, heavy with the weight of the impossible. A dream. To the two agents from the Hero Public Safety Commission, the words were a frustrating, childish anticlimax. To Nizu, they were a variable, a piece of a puzzle he was only just beginning to comprehend. To Recovery Girl, they were the potential ramblings of a traumatized mind. But to Toshinori Yagi, they were a key. A dream? The lead HPSC agent, a man named Takeda, finally said, his voice clipped and devoid of patience. Midoriya, with all due respect, we are past the point of dreams. A weapon of unknown origin appeared on a battlefield, you were somehow healed by it, and you used it to end a war that was costing us hundreds of lives per minute. We need facts, not fantasies. Deku flinched at the harsh tone but held the man's gaze. His own mind was still a whirlwind, the celestial vista of Yggdrasil and the grave, one-eyed face of Odin as vivid as the room around him. It didn't feel like a dream, he clarified, his voice growing stronger. It felt more real than this. He called himself Odin, the All-Father. He said he saw what was happening to our world, to Midgard. He said he sent the hammer because his son, Thor, was busy, and he was looking for someone. Deku's voice trailed off, the word catching in his throat. Someone what, young Midoriya? All Might asked gently, stepping forward to place a reassuring, skeletal hand on his shoulder. Someone worthy, Deku finished, the word tasting strange and foreign on his tongue. He looked at All Might, his eyes pleading for understanding. He told me the hammer, Mjolnir, came to me because I was already worthy. That it didn't give me worth, it just responded to it. And he warned me. He said this power, it's a beacon, that it would attract attention from other places. Agent Takeda let out an exasperated sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose. Odin. Thor. Midgard. This is Norse mythology. Are you suggesting we're dealing with literal gods? I'm suggesting you look at the evidence, Niza interjected, his voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision. He hopped down from his chair and trotted over to the table where Mjolnir lay. We have an object of indeterminate origin, composed of an unidentifiable element, that defies the laws of physics as we understand them. It seemingly responds only to Izuku Midoriya. When it arrived, it was accompanied by a directed atmospheric phenomenon that healed him of catastrophic injuries. Given these facts, is the witness's testimony, however fantastic, truly the most unbelievable part of this equation. The principal's logic was, as always, unassailable. The evidence was sitting right there, a lump of impossible gray metal that was a bigger affront to science than any dream could ever be. Toshinori's mind, however, was on a different track. He had spent years grappling with the metaphysical nature of One for All. He had spoken with the vestiges of his predecessors, communed with the ghosts of a legacy. The idea of a power with its own consciousness, its own will, its own judgment, was not entirely foreign to him. Nana Shimura had always said that One for All was more than a quirk. It was a sacred trust. A burden that chose its bearer as much as it was chosen. He mentioned the power inside me, Deku added, looking directly at All Might, his eyes wide. Odin. He called it a volatile power, a storm of souls. He said the hammer's energy, the lightning, it acted as a conduit. A stabilizer. He said they would work together, that was it. That was the detail that sealed it for Toshinori. No one outside of himself, young Midoriya, and perhaps All for One, knew the true nature of one for all. The storm of souls was too specific, too accurate a description for a random dream. It was information Deku couldn't have fabricated. I believe him, All Might stated, his voice ringing with a conviction that startled the HPSC agents. He turned to face them, the faint shadow of his former heroic stature returning to his withered frame. For years, we have accepted the reality of quirks, powers that warp the very fabric of human potential. We called it science, evolution. We grew complacent in our understanding of the universe. Perhaps we were simply seeing the first chapter of a much, much larger book. Today, a new chapter was opened. Our priority is not to dismiss it, but to learn how to read it. He looked at Nizu, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. Indeed. Agent Takeda, your concerns for national security are noted and valid. But for now, this investigation will be handled internally by UA. The boy is my student, the object is on my grounds, and the situation requires a level of academic open-mindedness that I fear your commission may lack. You will be kept apprised of any significant developments. It was a polite, impeccably worded dismissal. Takeda's jaw tightened, but he knew better than to argue with Nizu when he used that tone. He and his partner gave a stiff bow and exited the room, leaving a tense but unified silence in their wake. So, Recovery Girl said, breaking the quiet as she hobbled over to check Deku's monitors again. We're adding Norse deities to the curriculum now, are we? I'm going to need more coffee. 2 days later, Izuku found himself standing in the cavernous expanse of Training Ground Gamma, better known as the Factory of Sadness. The labyrinth of pipes, girders, and industrial machinery had never seemed so intimidating. All Might stood beside him in his skeletal form, while Nizu observed from a monitor in a secure control room. The hammer, Mjolnir, sat on the floor in the center of the room. After a lengthy and ultimately fruitless discussion, the only way they had managed to transport it from the med bay was by wheeling the entire reinforced table it rested on. So, what happens now? Deku asked, his voice echoing slightly in the huge space. He felt perfectly fine. Better than fine. A low-level hum of energy, a feeling of coiled potential, was his new constant companion. Now, we begin the first lesson of this new chapter, All Might said, his expression a mixture of excitement and paternal concern. We need to understand what you can do. The agents couldn't lift it. Can you? Deku nodded, his heart thumping in his chest. He walked toward the hammer, the memory of its impossible weightlessness in the crater warring with the sight of a dozen strong heroes failing to budge it. He knelt, his fingers trembling slightly as he reached for the leather-wrapped handle. The moment his skin made contact, he felt it, a familiar, welcoming thrum of power, like greeting an old friend. He closed his hand around the grip and lifted. It rose from the floor with the ease of lifting a notebook. He stood up, holding it in one hand, marveling at the sensation. It felt light, perfectly balanced. He gave it a tentative swing, and it cut through the air with a soft, whistling sound. Incredible, All Might breathed. It truly answers only to you. The dream, Deku said, his mind racing. Odin said it has my son's battle experience. That it would guide me. But how? Perhaps it's a matter of intent, All Might mused. In Jaku, your intent was clear: protect, defend, stop the threat. What is your intent now? Deku looked at the hammer. He thought about the way it had flown, the way it had returned to his hand. He focused on that memory, that feeling of connection. He held his empty hand out to his side and, feeling slightly foolish, concentrated. Come to me. He let go of the hammer. It dropped, and clattered onto the concrete floor with a heavy, final thud. Deku stared at it, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Oh. I guess not. All Might chuckled softly. Don't be discouraged, my boy. This isn't a quirk. There are no biological triggers or muscle memory to rely on. This is something else entirely. Worthiness. That's not a physical attribute. It's a state of being. Perhaps the hammer isn't a servant that obeys commands, but a partner that responds to conviction. Conviction. The word resonated with Deku. He thought back to Jaku again. The conviction to save those people. The conviction to stop gigantomachia. It was a pure, undiluted certainty of purpose. He walked over to the other side of the training ground, putting a good 50 yards between himself and the hammer. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes. He pictured not just the hammer, but the need for it. He imagined the villain appearing, a civilian in danger. He channeled that burning, selfless desire that was the core of his heroism. He focused on the certainty that he needed that hammer in his hand, right now, to save someone. He thrust his hand out. Come. For a second, nothing happened. Then, he heard a sharp scrape of metal on concrete. His eyes snapped open. Mjolnir had lifted off the ground. It hovered a few inches in the air, trembling, as if tasting his intent. Then, with a concussive boom that sent a shockwave of air rushing past him, it shot across the room. It flew not like a thrown object, but like a guided missile, a gray blur of purpose. Deku, startled by the sheer velocity, barely had time to brace himself. It slammed into his waiting palm with a force that would have shattered a normal person's arm, but to him, it felt like a firm, reassuring handshake. The power of the storm surged through him, and the low hum intensified into a roaring symphony. Yes! All Might exclaimed, his fists clenched. That's it! It's not about wanting it, it's about needing it. It's about righteous purpose. Deku stared at the hammer, a grin spreading across his face. This was real. It was all real. He felt a surge of confidence, a feeling that had been so scarce in the dark days leading up to the war. Now for the next step, All Might said, his tone growing more serious. The most important discovery. What Odin told you, about the synergy with One for All. The grin on Deku's face vanished, replaced by a shadow of fear. One for All. Even now, the memory of using 100% was a ghost of agony in his bones. The feeling of his body tearing itself apart, the blinding pain, the certainty that each full power smash was shaving years off his life. It was a deep-seated trauma. I don't know, he said, his voice trembling slightly. Every time I use it at full power I know, my boy, All Might said softly. I know the price. I paid it myself for years. But you heard what Odin said. The hammer's power is a conduit. A lightning rod. Trust in it, trust in yourself. You were chosen for a reason. Deku looked at the hammer, then at his mentor's encouraging face. He had to try. He had to know. If this was true, it would change everything. It would mean he could finally wield the full power of his legacy without destroying himself in the process. He could finally become the hero All Might always knew he could be. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes, reaching for the familiar, fiery wellspring of power within him. One for All. Full calling. The familiar green, bioelectric energy crackled to life around him. He felt the familiar strain as he pushed the percentage up. 20%. 30%. 45%. He could feel the power of the 8 vestiges stirring within him, a chaotic chorus of voices and energy. It was a raging river, always threatening to break its banks and flood everything. Then, he focused on the hammer. He tightened his grip, and as he did, he felt the second power, the power of the storm, rise to meet it. It was a deep, calm, resonant energy, like the vast, immeasurable pressure at the bottom of the ocean. The blue lightning he now associated with Mjolnir began to manifest, not on his skin, but within the green aura of One for All. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The chaotic, raging river of One for All was suddenly contained. The storm's power didn't dam it or fight it, it formed a new, stronger riverbed. It was a perfect, symbiotic relationship. The raw, stockpiled kinetic energy of OFA was the fuel. The divine Asgardian energy was the engine that could finally burn that fuel safely and efficiently. The wild green sparks were tamed, flowing in smooth, controlled circuits around the steady, pulsing blue light. He felt no strain. No pain. The power was immense, but it was stable. Contained. His, young Midoriya. All Might asked, his voice hushed with awe. Deku opened his eyes. He looked down at his arms. They were wreathed in a beautiful, terrifying vortex of emerald and sapphire lightning. The air around him crackled with power, and the very ground beneath his feet hummed. I can feel it, Deku whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. All of it. It's not trying to tear me apart anymore. He pushed the output higher. 60%. 80%. 95%. Then, with a final, cathartic surge of will, he crossed the threshold. One for all, 100%, he roared the words, and a pillar of green and blue energy erupted around him, sending a powerful but controlled shockwave out across the training ground. He braced himself for the snap of bone, the tearing of muscle. But there was only power, pure, absolute, and perfectly controlled. His body felt like a high-tension power line, humming with an energy that could light up a continent, but it was not breaking. He clenched his fist, and the mingling light intensified. He felt strong. He felt whole. He felt, for the first time, like the true master of the gift he had been given. Tears streamed freely down his face, lost in the swirling corona of energy. All Might. It doesn't hurt, he choked out, his voice thick with years of pent-up fear and pain. It doesn't hurt anymore. All Might was also crying, his face a mask of profound pride and relief. You did it, my boy. You truly did it. But there was one more test. Odin's words echoed in his mind. A conduit. A lightning rod. He looked at the far wall of the training ground, a massive slab of reinforced concrete designed to withstand the most powerful attacks. He reared back, Mjolnir held tight in his fist. He channeled everything, the legacy of the 8 holders, the full, unbridled might of one for all at 100%, and poured it into the hammer. The effect was spectacular. The green energy of Ofa was drawn from his body, funneling down his arm and into Mjolnir. The hammer's runes blazed with a blinding, emerald light, overpowering the blue. The air itself seemed to scream as it was supercharged. Asgardian smash! He yelled, putting a name to this new, impossible fusion of powers. He swung the hammer forward, not throwing it, but unleashing the energy it now contained. A beam of pure, concussive force, emerald green and shot through with sapphire lightning, erupted from the face of the hammer. It was not a punch. It was a cannon blast. The beam crossed the length of the training ground in a microsecond and struck the reinforced wall. There was no explosion, no deafening boom. For a moment, there was only an intense, blinding light and a high-pitched whine. Then, the light faded, and where the wall had been, there was now a perfectly circular, 10-foot hole, melted clean through 20 feet of reinforced concrete. The edges of the hole glowed cherry red, and the air smelled of ozone and superheated metal. Deku stood, his arms still outstretched, breathing heavily but completely unharmed. The power receded back to a manageable level, the light showed dying down. He had just unleashed an attack that likely surpassed All Might's own prime United States of Smash, and his arm was fine. He had done it. He had forged himself anew. The sounds of his training, the concussive booms and cracks of thunder, had not gone unnoticed. In the dorms of Class 1A, speculation was running wild. But for one student, the sounds were a personal affront. Katsuki Bakugo sat on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His wounds from the war were healing, but his pride was a festering, open wound. He had been there. He had fought, he had bled, he had been impaled. He had thrown everything he had at Shigaraki, and had been swatted aside like an insect. Then Deku. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. The falling star. The broken, crawling nerd who had suddenly stood up wreathed in lightning, wielding a power that made a mockery of everything Bakugo had ever worked for. He had watched Deku do in 10 minutes what the combined might of every pro hero on the field couldn't: end the fight. It was infuriating. It was maddening. It was, deep down, terrifying. His entire life had been built on a simple, brutal hierarchy of power. He was at the top, a natural-born prodigy. Deku was at the bottom, a pebble. Then Deku got a quirk, a borrowed power, and started climbing. It was annoying, but understandable. Deku was working, training, catching up. That was a race Bakugo could still win. But this? This was different. A magic hammer falls from the sky and chooses him? It wasn't earned. It wasn't won. It was a cheat code for the universe. It invalidated every drop of sweat, every sleepless night, every ounce of effort Bakugo had poured into becoming the best. He couldn't stand it. He had to see it. He had to face it. He stormed out of his dorm, ignoring the calls of Kirishima and Kaminari, and marched toward the source of the noise, Training Ground Gamma. The doors were locked, of course, but that had never stopped him before. A controlled, precise AP shot blew the magnetic lock, and he shoved the heavy doors open. He stepped inside just in time to witness the Asgardian smash. He saw the pillar of green and blue light, the impossible beam of energy, and the hole melted through the far wall. He saw Deku standing there, unharmed, powerful, and All Might looking at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated pride, and something inside Bakugo snapped. DKU! His roar echoed through the cavernous space, drawing both their heads. He stomped toward them, his hands sparking, his face a thunderous mask of rage. So that's it, huh? Bakugo snarled, coming to a stop before them. You break for 5 minutes and come back with a whole new goddamn power-up. First a borrowed quirk, now a magic space hammer? When do you start pulling your own weight, Deku? The words, born of a deep, existential frustration, hung in the air. Deku flinched, but he didn't back down. He saw the genuine pain and confusion behind the anger in Bakugo's eyes. Kaken, it's not like that. The hell it isn't. Bakugo shouted, taking a step closer. I've been fighting my whole damn life. I've been clawing my way to the top, proving I'm the best with my own 2 hands. And you just keep having power handed to you on a silver platter. How is that fair? How are you supposed to be a symbol if everything you have is just a gift? It's not a gift, Deku retorted, his voice rising. It's a responsibility. A burden. Do you think I asked for this? I was ready to die back there, Kaken. This just happened. Then prove it, Bakugo growled, his body shifting into a combat stance. Prove that it's you and not just your new toy. Right here. Right now. Fight me. No holding back. All Might stepped forward. Young Bakugo, that's enough. This isn't the time. Stay out of this, All Might. Bakugo snapped, not even looking at him. His wild, crimson eyes were locked on Deku. This is between me and him. It always has been. Deku looked at Bakugo's trembling hands, at the desperation in his eyes. He understood. This wasn't about winning or losing. This was about Bakugo's entire worldview being shattered. He needed to test himself against this new reality, to see where he stood. This was his way of trying to make sense of the senseless. It was, in its own explosive way, a cry for help. Deku looked at All Might and gave a slight nod. Then he turned back to Bakugo, settling Mjolnir into a comfortable grip. Okay, Kaken. If this is what you need. The fight began with an explosion. Bakugo launched himself forward, a screaming rocket of orange light. He didn't waste time with feints or probes. He went straight for overwhelming force. Deku, his body still humming with 100% full cowling, moved with a speed that was no longer just fast, but ethereal. He sidestepped the explosive charge, the heat washing over him, and spun, swinging Mjolnir in a wide, defensive arc. Bakugo, using his explosions for breathtaking aerial maneuverability, corrected his course in midair, firing a volley of AP shots. Deku deflected them with the flat of the hammer, each impact creating a shower of sparks and a loud clang. He wasn't just blocking, he was learning. The hammer seemed to move on its own, anticipating the trajectory of the blasts, meeting them with the most efficient angle. Stop just blocking, you coward! Bakugo roared, flipping through the air and unleashing a stun grenade. The flash was blinding, but Deku found his eyes were strangely unaffected, the divine energy within him filtering the intensity. He saw Bakugo's silhouette moving through the glare, preparing his ultimate move. He was pulling the pin on his right gauntlet. Howitzer impact. Bakugo became the center of a swirling vortex of fire and explosive power, a living meteor aimed directly at Deku. It was the move that had devastated Todoroki in the sports festival, a move capable of leveling half a city block. Deku planted his feet. He had the power to blast Bakugo out of the sky with an Asgardian smash. He had the strength to meet the blow head-on. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about overwhelming his rival. It was about showing him control. It was about proving that the power didn't own him. Instead of preparing an attack, Deku raised Mjolnir high above his head. He didn't channel one for all. He called upon the storm. Enough! He yelled, his voice booming with an unnatural, thunderous resonance. He brought the hammer down, not on Bakugo, but on the floor in front of him. The moment Mjolnir struck the concrete, it unleashed a deafening, non-lethal wave of pure thunder. It wasn't a destructive blast, but a concussive boom of sound and pressurized air. Bakugo's howitzer impact was literally blown apart. The swirling vortex of flame was shredded, the explosive force dissipated harmlessly into the air by the wall of sound. Bakugo himself was thrown backward, his trajectory completely arrested, and he tumbled to the ground, skidding to a halt a dozen feet away, his ears ringing. Silence descended once more. Bakugo lay on the ground, his chest heaving, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't seriously hurt, but his ultimate attack had been neutralized. Not overpowered, just dismissed. Deku stood over him, the blue lightning from the hammer crackling softly around him. He wasn't gloating. His expression was one of profound sadness. Is that enough, Kaken? Bakugo was quiet for a long time. He slowly pushed himself into a sitting position, his head bowed. The rage had finally burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, hard ash of understanding. The whole time, Bakugo said, his voice raspy and low. You were holding back. I wasn't trying to beat you, Kaken, Deku said softly. I was just trying to show you. Bakugo finally looked up, and the wild, chaotic anger in his eyes was gone. In its place was a sharp, focused intensity that Deku had never seen before. It was a look of grudging, infuriating respect. That hammer. Bakugo started, pushing himself to his feet. It didn't choose you because you're strong. It didn't fall from the sky because you got a lucky quirk. He clenched his fist, his gaze turning inward. It came for you when you were broken, bleeding, and crawling in the dirt to save some strangers. It came because you're a self-sacrificing idiot. He looked Deku dead in the eye. That's your real power, isn't it? That stupid, reckless need to save everyone. That's what it found worthy. He turned his back on Deku, and began to walk toward the door. He paused, his shoulders slumped for a moment before he straightened them with renewed, ferocious resolve. Don't think this changes anything, Bakugo said, not looking back. I'm still going to beat you. I'm still going to be the #1 hero. He paused, and then added the words that would redefine their rivalry forever. But I'm not chasing your quirks anymore. I'm not chasing a magic hammer. He glanced over his shoulder, a fierce, predatory grin spreading across his face. I'm coming for that worthiness, Deku. I'm going to become a hero so great, so undeniable, that even gods will look down and say, we chose the wrong guy. Just you watch. And with that, Katsuki Bakugo walked out of the training ground, leaving behind a stunned Izuku Midoriya and a new, profound understanding of the path that lay before them both. The forge had been lit, not just for a new power, but for a new kind of hero, and a new kind of rivalry. The first video to break containment wasn't from a news helicopter or a hero's bodycam. It was from a cracked smartphone, filmed from a collapsed alcove by a terrified office worker who thought he was recording his last moments. The footage was grainy, the audio a distorted mess of screams, explosions, and a wind that sounded like the world tearing apart. For 47 seconds, it was a horror film. It showed the monster that was Tamura Shigaraki, a walking avatar of decay, and the hopeless, desperate struggle of Japan's finest heroes. It captured the exact moment Katsuki Bakugo was impaled and tossed aside. It was a raw, unfiltered broadcast from the end of the world. Then, at the 48th second, the sky screamed. The phone's microphone peaked, turning the sound into a digital shriek, but the camera caught it all. A pinprick of impossible light descending like a vengeful star. The cataclysmic impact. The settling dust. And the hammer. For the next 3 minutes, the world watched, transfixed, as the god of ruin failed to lift a simple tool. They watched a broken, bleeding boy, the same one who had been crawling moments before, reach for it. And then, they witnessed a miracle, or an apocalypse, depending on their point of view. The pillar of lightning that answered the boy's touch was not a quirk. Quirks were understood, categorized, their limits known. They were biological, an extension of the self. This was an act of cosmic intervention. The video captured the boy's transfiguration, the raw, untamed power crackling in his eyes, the way he moved with the surety of a storm. It recorded the effortless neutralization of decay, the felling of the giant Gigantomachia with a single, thunderous throw, and the humiliating, panicked retreat of the villains who had brought Hero Society to its knees. The video cut out as the first responders began to move in, but it was enough. Uploaded to a small hero watching forum, it was initially dismissed as a high-quality fake. But within the hour, a second video surfaced, this one from a damaged traffic camera a mile away, showing the same events from a different angle. Then a third, from a security drone that had survived the initial chaos. By the end of the day, the Jaka footage was the single most watched event in human history. It broke the internet, not with memes or celebrity gossip, but with a profound, species-wide shudder of existential shock. News channels from Tokyo to New York dropped all other programming. Panels of quirk analysts, military strategists, physicists, and theologians were convened, all staring at the same grainy footage, all struggling to find a vocabulary for what they had just seen. The public reaction was a tidal wave of every conceivable emotion. In millions of homes, there was terror. The power on display was absolute, biblical. It was a force that dwarfed all might in his prime. If this lightning hero, as the media had dubbed him, was a hero, what would happen if he ever had a bad day? What government could stop him? What army? The world had spent a century adjusting to the reality of quirks. Now it had to contend with the apparent reality of gods. In just as many homes, there was all. Hope, which had been bleeding out on the streets of Jaka City, had been rekindled not by a candle, but by a supernova. For those who had felt the creeping dread of All for One's return, this new hero was a sign that the universe itself had not abandoned them. He was a miracle, a protector sent in their darkest hour. Shrines, both digital and physical, began to appear, dedicated to the nameless, faceless boy who could command the heavens. And then there were the theories. On forums and social media, conspiracies bloomed like algae in a fetid pond. He was an alien, the first contact from a hyper-advanced species. He was a secret government weapon, a product of the same program that created the Nomu, finally unveiled. He was a cryptid, a mythological being who had been awakened by the chaos of the war. Hashtags like Lightning Hero, Jaka Miracle, and the terrifyingly popular Hammer God trended globally for 72 hours straight. The world was holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop, terrified and thrilled by the question that hung over every news broadcast and dinner table conversation: what happens now? Inside the sterile, pressurized quiet of the Hero Public Safety Commission's Central Command Center in Tokyo, the mood was not one of awe or terror. It was one of pure, controlled panic. The woman at the head of the massive obsidian table was HPSC President Kinoshita. She was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, and a will that had bent prime ministers and corporate titans alike. For 30 years, her job had been to maintain order in a world of chaos. She managed heroes like assets on a balance sheet, deploying them with calculated precision, mitigating their collateral damage, and shaping their public image. The entire system of Hero Society, with its rankings, regulations, and licenses, was a complex machine of her design, built for one purpose: control. And now, a boy with a magic hammer had thrown a divine wrench into her perfect machine. "Report," she commanded, her voice dangerously calm. The room was filled with the top minds of Japan's hero infrastructure: Agent Takeda, a dozen department heads, and several top-ranking pro-heroes patched in via holographic displays. A nervous analyst cleared his throat. "Ma'am, public sentiment is volatile. Polling shows a near-even split between those who view the Lightning Hero as a savior, and those who see him as a potential threat on par with All for One. The international reaction is even more concerning. The American government is demanding a full disclosure under the International Hero Accords, and we've intercepted communications from Russia and China indicating their intelligence agencies are attempting to identify the subject. They're trying to find out who he is," Takeda grunted, his arms crossed. "So are we. All we know is he's a UA student under NISA's protection. The principal has invoked an emergency academic sanctuary clause, blocking our access. He's stonewalling us." President Kinoshita tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the table. "NISA is irrelevant for the moment. The asset we need to control is not the boy. It's the weapon. What is the status of the retrieval operation?" All eyes turned to the grim-faced hero on the main holographic screen. It was the number 18 pro hero, Daisuke Crag Ishihara. His quirk, tectonic shift, allowed him to manipulate the density of any earthen material he touched and granted him immense physical strength, said to rival that of All Might in his later years. Crag's image flickered. He was standing in training ground Gamma at UA. The operation was a failure, Madam President, he said, his voice tight with professional humiliation. Kinoshita's eyes narrowed. Elaborate, hero. Crag took a deep breath. We approached the object as planned. Principal Nizu and All Might were present, as was the boy, Midoriya. They allowed me to make an attempt. I applied over 200 tons of direct lifting force. The only result was the cracking of the concrete beneath my feet. I then attempted to manipulate the floor itself, to lift the slab of concrete the hammer was resting on. The floor lifted. The hammer did not. It remained in place, hovering in midair until the slab was lowered. It seems to be anchored to a point in space, irrespective of the surface it's on. A wave of stunned murmurs went through the room. It gets worse, Crag continued, his voice strained. After my failure, the boy Midoriya walked over to it. He just picked it up. Lifted it like it was made of styrofoam. He then tossed it in the air and caught it. President Kinoshita stared at the hero's hologram, her calm facade finally cracking to reveal a flicker of raw dread. So it's confirmed. The power is symbiotic. It answers only to him. Yes, ma'am, Crag said. And I must state for the record, standing in its presence, and then in his when he held it, the power differential is unlike anything I've ever felt. My quirk felt like a child's toy. This is not a person we can detain or force into compliance. We are, and I do not say this lightly, completely at his mercy. The hologram fizzled out, leaving a chilling silence in its wake. Kinoshita steepled her fingers, her mind racing faster than any supercomputer. The old playbook was useless. Brute force was impossible. Coercion was out of the question. She couldn't threaten a boy who could level their headquarters from a different prefecture. If we cannot seize the weapon, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, then we must control the wielder. We cannot allow a free-roaming nuclear deterrent with the emotional stability of a teenager to dictate the future of this country. We will bring him into the fold. We will give him purpose, a mission, a leash. Takeda, draft a proposal. We're creating a new designation. Special Hazardous Environment Operative, Level S. He will answer directly to this office. We will make him our weapon, whether he wants to be or not. Frame it as the only way to protect his friends, his school, his secret identity. Find his leverage and press. It was a desperate gambit, an attempt to cage a god with red tape. But it was the only move she had left. In the tranquil, book-lined chaos of Nizu's office, the mood was far less panicked, but no less serious. Izuku sat on a plush sofa, a cup of tea steaming untouched on the table before him. All Might sat beside him, a silent, supportive presence. Nizu, perched atop his oversized desk, had just finished summarizing the Commission's latest request. They want to make you a government agent, Nizu concluded, taking a delicate sip from his own teacup. You would be given a special license, exempting you from normal hero protocols. You'd be assigned a handler and given missions of the highest national priority. Covert operations, counterterrorism, and though they were careful not to state it explicitly, preemptive strikes against perceived threats, both foreign and domestic. Izuku stared into his tea. A part of him, the small, desperate-to-please boy who had always dreamed of being a recognized hero, was tempted. A special license. A direct line to the top. The chance to do the most good on the biggest stage. It was everything he had ever wanted, twisted into a shape he no longer recognized. They want to turn me into a weapon, he said, the words tasting like ash. A tool they can point at their problems. That is the long and short of it, yes, Nizu said. They are afraid, Izuku Midoriya. And fear is the mother of control. They see a power they cannot comprehend, and their only instinct is to put it in a box. It is, from their perspective, a logical, if unimaginative, solution. All Might finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. When I was the symbol of peace, the Commission made similar overtures. They wanted me to be their sword, to operate in the shadows, to be a deterrent they could wield on the world stage. I refused. Izuku looked up, surprised. You did? But you worked with them all the time. I worked with them, my boy. I was never their employee, All Might corrected gently. A symbol of peace cannot belong to one government. A symbol must be a beacon of hope for everyone, not a weapon of the state. The moment I took my orders from them, the moment I let them decide who was and was not worthy of being saved, the symbol would have died. I would have just been a man with a powerful quirk in the employ of politicians. He looked at Izuku, his sunken eyes filled with a fierce, protective light. Your power is even greater than mine was. The responsibility that comes with it is astronomical. This choice you are about to make will define not just your future, but the future of Hero Society. Will you be their hammer, or will you be the world's shield? The question hung in the air, heavy and profound. Shield or hammer? It was the choice between being a hero and being a soldier. Izuku thought of Odin's words. Proved my choice was not in error. Odin hadn't chosen a soldier. He had chosen a selfless boy who had tried to be a shield with his own broken body. The path was clear. It was terrifying, but it was clear. I can't do it, Izuku said, his voice firm with a newfound conviction. I can't be their agent. This power. Mjolnir, it wasn't given to me by a committee or a government. It was entrusted to me. I have to honor that trust. He stood up, pacing the room, his mind working, building his own declaration of purpose. I'll work with them. I'll listen to their intelligence. But the decision on where I go, who I save, that has to be mine. It has to be based on who needs help the most, not who is the highest strategic priority. I have to be a hero for everyone, just like you were. Otherwise, I'm not worthy of this. He reflexively touched his right hand, where he could still feel the phantom weight of the hammer. A wide, slightly feral grin spread across Nisa's face. An excellent, truly heroic decision, Midoriya. I was hoping you'd say that. He spun around in his chair and gestured to a large monitor on the wall, which flickered to life. Because I have already been preparing for this eventuality. The Commission wishes to cage you with bureaucracy? Very well. We shall build you a better cage, one with a much larger door. The monitor displayed a complex series of legal documents, corporate charters, and international treaties. I have, through several third-party philanthropic foundations I control, established the Midoriya Hope Initiative. Legally, it's a non-profit international disaster relief organization. Functionally, it's a vehicle to give you complete operational autonomy. It will have its own funding, its own support staff recruited from UA's finest alumni, and most importantly, it will have international recognition, placing you outside the direct jurisdiction of the Japanese HPSC. They can request your aid, but they can no longer deploy you. Izuku and All Might stared at the screen, dumbfounded by the principal's Machiavellian foresight. You will, of course, continue your studies at UA, Nisa added cheerfully. Your education is paramount. But when the need arises, Deku will operate under the banner of this initiative. It gives you a legal framework, a support system, and a political shield. The Commission gets to save face by officially partnering with your organization, and you get the freedom to be the hero you need to be. Everyone wins, but we win more. Izuku was speechless. He had been prepared to make a stand, to become a rogue, a vigilante if he had to. But Nisa had just handed him a kingdom. The world is holding its breath, waiting to see if you are a monster or a messiah, Nisa said, his cheerful tone dropping away, replaced by a deep seriousness. The Commission wants to define you. The media wants to label you. Now is the time for you to define yourself. The video dropped 24 hours later. It wasn't released through official news channels. It simply appeared, uploaded simultaneously to every major video sharing platform in the world from an untraceable server. It was clearly filmed in one of UA's training grounds, the lighting professional, the audio crystal clear. Nisa's production values were, as with all things, impeccable. It opened on Izuku Midoriya. He was not in a hero costume, but in a simple UA track suit. He looked young, nervous, and utterly sincere. For the first time, the world was seeing the face of the lightning hero, and he was just a boy. Hello, he began, his voice trembling slightly before finding its resolve. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I am a student in the hero course at UA High School. I am the person you saw in the footage from Jaka City. He took a deep breath. I know there's a lot of fear and confusion right now. I know the power I used is new and scary. I understand that. And I'm sorry for the fear that I've caused. That was never my intention. He looked directly into the camera, and his earnest green eyes seemed to connect with every single person watching. I can't explain where this power came from in a way that will make sense to everyone. The only thing I can tell you is that I believe it was given to me for a reason, to help people. And that's all I've ever wanted to do. The camera panned out slightly, revealing Mjolnir resting on a pedestal beside him. This is not a government weapon. I am not a soldier, and I am not a god. I am a hero in training, and I have been given an incredible, terrifying responsibility. I don't plan on running from it. The Hero Public Safety Commission will continue to protect Japan, and I will support them whenever I can. But this power doesn't belong to just one nation. So, with the help of my school, I'll be using it to help anyone, anywhere, who is in need. He reached over and casually picked up the hammer, holding it loosely in one hand. The simple act sent a fresh shockwave through the global audience. A lot of people have been calling me the lightning hero or other things, he said, a faint, embarrassed blush on his cheeks. But I already have a name. When I was a kid, a friend gave it to me as an insult. It meant useless. But another friend helped me see it differently. She told me it sounded like the Japanese phrase for you can do it. She helped me turn it into something that gives me hope. He stood up straighter, Mjolnir held firmly at his side, the nervous boyishness replaced by a quiet, indomitable strength. My name is Deku. And I promise, I will do everything in my power to be a hero you can all believe in. I will be your shield. I just ask that you give me the chance. The screen went black. The world, which had been holding its breath in fear, let out a collective, shaky sigh. The fear didn't vanish entirely. The conspiracy theories didn't just disappear, but the conversation had fundamentally changed. The nameless, terrifying force of nature now had a face, a name, and a voice. And that voice was not the booming command of a god or the cold decree of a weapon. It was the earnest, hopeful promise of a hero. In a dorm room at UA, Achiko Uraraka was crying, her heart swelling with a pride so intense it hurt. Beside her, Tenya Ida was chopping the air with rigid hands, declaring Midoriya's speech a pinnacle of heroic sincerity. And across the room, slumped in a chair, Katsuki Bakugo stared at the black screen, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. Deku, huh? He muttered to himself. Putting a name on the target. I like it. President Kinoshita watched the broadcast in her office, her teacup rattling in its saucer. She had been outmaneuvered, outplayed at her own game by a creature she should have known better than to underestimate. Nisa had won, but as she watched the global approval ratings for Deku begin to skyrocket, she realized that perhaps, in the end, they all had. The world was still holding its breath. But now, laced with the lingering fear, was a powerful, dangerous new substance. Hope. And it had a name.